Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of the Ordinary Sacred, and I'm so happy you're here. Today, I want to talk about managing negative self-talk. I was actually watching a YouTube video of a prominent figure talking about complex PTSD and developmental trauma and how to heal from that. And they were giving really valuable suggestions. However, they did not have um, an understanding of parts, of the fact that we are multiple, that there are many parts inside. So as they were talking about managing negative self-talk, they were saying, when you speak to yourself negatively, and there's a part of me that wanted to say, well, who is the you that's speaking and who is the self that they're speaking to? You are talking about two different parts here. And really, they're talking about three parts because they're wanting to enlist a manager to try to suppress the critic who is criticizing another part that likely has some kind of extreme behavior or emotion. So they're actually talking about three parts inside there, even though, when people have the framework of a mono mind, it's actually very confusing and constricting because I'm talking to myself negatively and I need to manage that. And there's no realization that there's actually several parts that they are referring to, and none of them are the self. So I actually made a post about this. So I'm going to share the post with you, and I just want to explain it so you can kind of see the difference between that approach and IFS. Okay. So, oh, sorry. Let me go back. Um, so when someone teaches you how to manage negative self-talk, like I said, they're actually referring to three parts, and none of them are the self. So they're enlisting this manager who is trying to suppress the critic. No, stop it, right? A lot of people will say, stand up to your critic, fight your critic, tell them, no, you are not going to say this. And again, there's very good intention here, because the truth is the critic is having a harmful impact, a negative impact on the parts that it is berating and it is harsh with. It is a bully inside. But this strategy doesn't work because the more the manager tries to suppress the critic, it doesn't understand that the critic feels like it has to do this or else. So it's just going to keep pushing up and trying harder and getting bigger, exasperating the whole thing. And even if the manager does succeed in pressing the critic down and getting, a self-like part to come in, there's still the roots have not been dealt with, and so there's not an old, big picture solution there. So again, let me go to the next slide. So many self-help or therapeutic modalities enlist manager parts to suppress the inner critics who try to shame other extreme parts who hold unwanted behaviors or emotions. So whenever you or someone else says, I really hate myself, right? I would get curious and say, who is the you that hates and who is the you that's being hated? Which parts are they, right? When someone says, my parts really hate me, I'll say, ask them who you are. Who are they pointing to that they hate? I did a recent video about some parts in my system. I had a really, really harsh inner critic that was basically murderous. It was saying, you need to die. You're so pathetic. You're weak. And I said, who am I? And how old am I? And it said, you're 5 and you're pathetic. You're too sensitive. And immediately I was then able to be the self and see, there's this really harsh inner critic pointing at a 5-year-old who is very emotional and sensitive. And this inner critic is like, I have to get rid of you. I have to stop you from being this way because your very existence, your high volatility, your emotional nature is going to get you punished, rejected, abandoned by caregivers, teachers, peers. You're going to be alone. You're going to die, you know? the critic is wanting to suppress this part. So learning to identify who is the critic pointing to is really helpful. And I just put extreme parts here because often critics are pointing at exiles. That part for me was an exile that held really intense emotions. And the quality of that I now discovered is a good quality of sensitivity and access to emotion. But a critic can also be pointing often at a firefighter, maybe another extreme part who is, causing you to do something that is socially unacceptable or is causing harm on the inside or outside. So it might be a binging part, a self-harming part, a raging part, it could be all kinds of things. And really, any part inside can be critical of another part, right? And so whenever you notice an inner critic, you can ask, who are you concerned about? Who are you pointing to? Show me what your concern is. Okay, so the modalities that I was talking about, and particularly in this video I was watching, what they were encouraging was basically this manager to try to get, the way they were putting it was you get yourself to, instead of being critical, to basically have self-like qualities and get curious and be compassionate and say kind things, be the loving parent, right, to the extreme parts. Now, this is a partial solution. I want to recognize that there's very good intention in this. It's is part of the equation. So I want to recognize the goodness in it. But it really is self-like parts because it's not happening naturally. There's kind of a forcing, a willing of kind of robotically saying, no, I love you. It's okay. Tell me about it, right? And I've talked about this before. This is not necessarily a bad thing. This self-like parts can actually be like a bridge between ourself and the extreme parts so that they get an idea for what self might feel like and then are more open to actually experiencing self. So for me, this kind of strategy was actually a stepping stone into IFS and what is actually more effective than this. So I'll share with you what that is. So instead, in internal family systems, the core self asks the manager for space. Instead of having the manager do all this work, it says, you can rest. If you give me space, then the self can give loving attention to, this is key, to both the critic and the extreme part simultaneously. Just like a wise parent intervenes with two of their children who are feuding with each other, right? And they love them both and they're curious about the experience of both. They are bigger than them. They can hold space for both of them. They might focus individually on them, one at a time, but they're not like preferring one over the other. Good parenting on the outside is exactly the same as good parenting on the inside. And whether you experience on the outside with your own parent or observing it somehow, and then that helps you understand what it looks like on the inside, or like for me, I really, like Dick says, that IFS is a constraint release model, that once parts gave me space, myself naturally emerged, and it just is naturally a good parent. You don't have to have had exceptional parents to know how to be a good inner parent to your parts because yourself naturally knows how to do that. It's really amazing. If and when your other parts will give enough space, the self will come out and it's compassionate, it has perspective, it has all and, it's bigger than the parts, it can hold a strong core, it can attend and attune to the emotions of the inner children, of the other parts. It can mediate between conflicts between the parts. It really does have this capacity. And it's different than the energy of a manager who's trying to, a manager is like, I guess, a bad example of a parent, because a manager is usually a parentified child. It's a younger part that's trying to use force to push down a part it thinks is bad, rather than what the self does, which is to get really curious and is open to helping the part, understanding its experience and helping them. So in IFS, what would happen is the self would go to the critic, and if the manager and the other parts who hate the critic give space, the self can say, tell me about it. Tell me why you do this. Tell me why it makes sense to you. The critic is often a young inner child as well. It has learned that this is the strategy that maybe worked in the past or kept you safe in the past. So it is stuck in the past. And you can ask, how did this make sense? How did this work for you in the past? What are you afraid would happen if you didn't berate this part? And really hear its history, because its answer to that question, what are you afraid would happen if you didn't do this, will reveal to you the next steps of, if I could do a line under the critic of what it protects, right? It may need the self to go to the parts that are stuck in moments where they were, if the critic didn't stop them, they would have been abandoned, rejected, punished. So it may need to go to those times. Again, also the critic may be very much pointing at this extreme part, which may itself be the exile, or maybe a firefighter that's really extreme, or it could also be a manager that's really extreme. It could say you are going against your body's capacity. This perfectionist part, or this people-pleasing part, this performing part, workaholic part pushes you, and it causes problems with your family, with your body. And you want to take it seriously and say, thank you, critic, for pointing me to this extreme part. What if I, the self, could go to them and help them? Would you be able to rest? And the response that I get time and time again from critics is, yes, please, please go help them. Because like I said, the inner critic is a child and they don't have the capacity. They can't actually help the extreme part. So they're doing the only thing they know how to do, which is to shame them. So they'll say, yes, please. And so then the self can go to the extreme part, whether it's a binging part, an addictive part, a raging part, whatever it is. And then it can say, get curious with them. Tell me what you're afraid would happen if you didn't do this. And what are you protecting? Can I go back to them and reparent them and connect with them and witness them and update them, bring them into the present, help them unburden? And then once those parts are unburdened, the extreme part doesn't have to be so extreme. The critic is able to naturally relax. The manager doesn't have to manage the critic. Everyone in the system can rest under the beautiful self-leadership of the self being able to go, this grounded, loving, attuning inner parent presence that has the capacity to connect and get curious about all the parts. That's the solution in internal family systems. So I hope you understand kind of the difference between those two. And maybe you've experienced it, maybe you haven't. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to leave them in the comments below.